Honestly, there were more issues. She was just one of many problems. Really, what it comes down to is poor leadership and planning. They had months upon months to get this stuff done. They chose not to do anything until the end of session and try to cram it all in together. Another piece that held it up was there is one member, Senator Omar Fateh, who's one of the Democratic Socialists of America, and because he wasn't getting his way on one bill, he just left the Capitol for about 12 hours, for a 12-hour period, about 48 hours before session ended. And he said, "I'm not coming back and I will sink everything," was a message that he was sending to his caucus. Which is funny because they have some members who ran on moderate positions who said they had no choice but to go along with what the caucus wanted, when clearly it's showing that any one senator has the ability to move and sway legislation if they so choose. Every single Democrat signed up to this.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of American Potential. You know, the Minnesota State Senate session ended this year in total chaos. Have a listen.
Mr. President, follow the rules.
We will not stand for this.
Mr. Point of Order.
Mr. President, Section 581.
Wow. So what happened for these state senators to try and get the attention of the Senate president? In Minnesota, by law, the House and Senate have to finish their session by midnight on a certain date, and that's what they were trying to do. The House was passing bills in a timely manner for them to go to the Senate, but something happened in the Senate where they stopped any floor proceedings for several hours. Now, with that delay, it didn't leave enough time to properly debate and vote on bills. So, with time ticking away, a decision was made to roll the remaining bills into an omnibus bill, but there were multiple issues with doing that too. Even with these issues, the Senate still passed the bill and the governor signed it. I want to welcome Jake Coleman, Americans for Prosperity Minnesota State Director, and RaeAnna Lee, who is the Legislative and Coalitions Director for AFP Minnesota. Thank you both for joining us. Jake and RaeAnna, how are you?
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
Okay, so that sounded crazy, and I know people, I don't know, when they hear that kind of stuff, they just shake their head, particularly when it's in a legislative body. There's a lot of backstory, I think, that led up to the craziness that we heard at the beginning. But first, explain what the timeline is for both the House and the Senate to pass these bills. I know, Jake, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So in last year was a bonding year. So Minnesota has a biennium, which means the first year of the session is the budget year. The second year is the bonding year. They start, I think, February 12th this year, and they had a constitutional deadline that had to be done by midnight on May 20th. They should have had plenty of time. They had months to get all this done, and there wasn't a lot left on their plate after all of the bad legislation they had passed the previous year. So this was completely unnecessary. But essentially, and I think RaeAnna can go into more detail, what happened is in the Senate, they have a one-seat majority. And one of the most far left senators, he's a Democratic Socialist, held the entire body hostage until he got what he wanted on a specific bill, which left no time for them to get any of their work done.
Wow. RaeAnna, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that clip, it really should not happen. And like Jake said, we are a trifecta state. The Democrats, or in our case, we call them DFL. They hold the governor's office, they hold the House, and they hold the Senate. And unfortunately, there's a whole timeline of mixtures in the recipe here that are leading up to this moment, really. The past 2 years, Republicans were really shut out of the process entirely. They operated like they had much more than a one-seat majority in the legislature. So it's sort of a culmination of very limited debate time, not fully understanding bills that they're actually passing and writing into law. And then, you have these huge bills that they're rolling together in this Omnibus Prime one that they had. It was just really, it should not have happened. And it was a result of bad mismanagement by leadership in the majority.
Poor leadership and poor planning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a 1-vote Democrat majority in the Senate, right?
Yep.
Correct.
How about the House? So what's the House like?
It's I think it's technically 6 votes in the House. It's 70-64. So to make any changes this year, and the entire House is up for election this year, Republicans need to win 4 seats. If they win 3 seats, it ends up being a tie, which creates its own chaos.
Yeah. Now when you have these omnibus bills, they're never good. They're certainly not good when they move through Congress. I know in state legislative sessions as well, they can be pretty troublesome because you can kind of stick anything you want into them. Did that happen here, RaeAnna?
Oh, yes, it did. It happened all in 2023, and it happened absolutely in 2024. And again, I think Jake might have mentioned this, but, really technically nothing needed to get done this year except for bonding. So it just goes back to the point that this kind of chaotic ending never should have happened. So this omnibus bill that we're talking almost 3,000 pages coming up, 30 minutes to midnight at the end of session. And nobody knew what was in it. Nobody could access it on the internet. The public could not read it. Nobody knew what they were actually voting on, which I think is probably one of the most atrocious aspects of the way that session closed, and just a total disgrace, really, to the institution, how people trust their government to run in good faith.
Sure. Did it pass by 1 vote in the Senate?
Yes, it did.
Was there a party line vote?
Yep.
Sure.
And it was funny. It really reminded me of the Nancy Pelosi line. We have to pass the legislation to find out what's inside it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you remember now that it's passed, how much spending, do you know how much spending was actually rolled up into that bill?
Too much. This is where I'll make the plug for our state's campaign, One Expensive Minnesota. They did the majority of the spending last year in 2023. They blew through a $17.5 billion surplus, a lot of it on one-time spending. They actually set us up. There's a deficit looming from all the spending just in 2023. And in 24, this past year, they started to realize that fiscally speaking, they were in a pretty delicate situation. So they were a little bit more conservative with the spending because really there was no money left to spend. But they still did it. There were some dollars that went out, but the vast majority of it went last year. And that's for us to say, for anybody listening in Minnesota, you can go to oneexpensiveminnesota.com and see how much this trifecta has cost you.
In addition to the $17 billion surplus, they also raised about $10 billion in taxes and fees. They grew our government by 40%, and it was, I think, somewhere in the realm of $250 to $500 million in additional spending this year, which is just unsustainable going forward.
Yeah. Now, Jake, I guess I'll start with you on this, and love to have both of you answer. But one senator had some legal issues. What happened to her, and how did that end up playing a role in all of this?
That certainly played a role. So we have a state senator, Nicole Mitchell, who was arrested with probably about a month left in session for breaking into her stepmother's house. The stepmother called the police because she heard someone in her room. By the time the police got there, they caught Senator Mitchell in the basement, dressed like a cat burglar, completely covered in head to toe in black, with like a black stocking cap on. She had something covering her flashlight so it wouldn't be seen. And she was trying to get out a basement window where she had her stepmother's laptop inside it. She claimed it was a welfare check, which I find strange that she needed to climb through a basement window to get in the house to do that.
Or I might add, dress like a cat burglar.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, maybe.
Usually the front door works. It occurred, I think, in the middle of the night. So again, usually you stop by relatives during the day. You don't try to climb through windows in the middle of the night.
Wow.
And the stepmother woke up to her laying on her bedroom floor. And that's when she scrambled down to the basement. So I don't know what's going on there. Yeah. I wish it was a made up story, but it's not.
So how did that end up delaying the Senate legislative session?
So there was a lot of talk about what to do with her afterwards, because she also admitted to the police that clearly I did something wrong, I think was her quote. And also, I'm not very good at this, I guess. So there was a question about whether or not she should leave her seat. The problem is, in a 1-seat majority, if she's gone, it changes leadership makeup, it changes committee makeup, and they have no ability to pass, because in Minnesota, it requires 34 votes to pass any legislation, regardless of how many people vote against it. So if you look at that final chaotic piece of session, they got 34 votes against. They didn't even wait for the Republicans to vote no. They just got to 34, passed legislation, and moved on. I think there was only half the Republicans even got a chance to vote. Technically, they're supposed to wait till everyone's in the chamber and everyone has a chance to vote, but with time running out, they couldn't do that and broke a bunch of procedural rules. I guess the rules only matter for them when they work in their favor.
And I'd like to note, too, one of our senators is actually blind. So he really was cut short in being able to keep up with what he was passing. And so that was really, really disappointing to see.
Yeah, you couldn't even access the bill online. The website crashed. They rolled it into the chamber as they were voting. No one had an opportunity to look at it. It was just about a half a foot or a foot high, sitting on a cart being wheeled in as they start calling votes.
It had probably just been negotiated and stuff hours before that, right? Like nobody got to see any of this.
100%. And it was a combination of, I think, 12 different bills that they all rolled into one, which there is an argument going on. I don't know if people are going to take it to court. Minnesota's state constitution requires single subject for bills. Clearly, this wasn't the case. I mean, this contained everything from tax fixes to gun control. There was a multitude of items that were stuffed into this bill, and it should have never occurred.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. What happened to the cat burglar welfare checking state senator? I mean, is that still playing out, the court case and stuff?
It is still playing out. It's funny. She was the deciding vote on whether or not to put any penalties on her. So again, you're supposed to recuse yourself when there are matters of personal interest that come up, but with only 34 votes, they needed her to continue to vote, to keep her in the Senate, to allow her to continue to vote, to keep her be part of the caucus. So it's currently still playing out. Her lawyers have made some pretty interesting comments as they've been meeting in front of the ethics committee. They keep postponing any decisions on that as well. I think we're expecting the hearing, the first actual trial, to start in, what is it, RaeAnna, maybe September or October?
Yeah, this fall.
So she voted on whether or not she should be penalized for this?
Yes.
How did she vote? The suspense is killing me. How did she vote?
It was the deciding vote that made her not be penalized.
Oh, gosh, I can't imagine.
You never would have guessed.
High suspense, high drama in Minnesota. Oh man, that is crazy. That's amazing. Okay, so that kind of is what led to the delay in the Senate, was kind of dealing with her and that whole issue?
No.
Or were there other issues too?
Honestly, there were more issues. She was just one of many problems. Really, what it comes down to is poor leadership and planning. They had months upon months to get this stuff done. They chose not to do anything until the end of session and try to cram it all in together. Another piece that held it up was there is one member, Senator Omar Fateh, who's one of the Democratic Socialists of America. And because he wasn't getting his way on one bill, he just left the Capitol for about 12 hours, for a 12-hour period, about 48 hours before session ended. And he said, "I'm not coming back and I will sink everything." Was a message that he was sending to his caucus, which is funny because they have some members who ran on moderate positions who said they had no choice but to go along with what the caucus wanted, when clearly it's showing that any one senator has the ability to move and sway legislation if they so choose. Every single Democrat signed up for this, as Tim Walz and I think even President Obama talked about it, the most progressive legislature in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy. There were there are other bills that were voted on, still left to be voted on. Did they get the actual work that they needed to get done, or did they have to put this bill ahead of those other priorities?
Their one job this year was to do bonding, and that did not get done. They put this in front of everything else. Yes.
Because they wanted to spend more money? Was that why they put that ahead of everything else?
So the only way they could have spent more money is if they would have included Republicans in negotiations, because in our state, you need 3/5 of a majority to be able to pass any borrowing. So their plan was to just pass a cash only bill. And in that case, you only need just a simple majority.
This is just this is stunning to me. So the bonding didn't even get done, and that's the purpose of the entire session.
Exactly. And it's really sad to see that, you have this trifecta, this majority that's really just drunk on power and just refusing all out to negotiate with Republicans to get this bonding done. That's really what this year is supposed to be about. And instead, it just got dragged down so badly. And the ending just left such a sour taste in everybody's mouth. I mean, people were literally crying watching the institutions just totally disintegrate. And actually, that same clip that you played at the beginning, that also played out in the House, because the same dynamic was happening where they rolled out the bill. Nobody knew what was in it. And the House just descended as well into that kind of chaos.
In the House, they didn't even have the bill printed yet when they passed it. There was no version of it that even existed at that point.
And they voted on it without knowing, like not even a version of it to lay on the desk.
That's correct.
Yeah, it moved so quickly that Republicans didn't even realize that there was a vote happening. So you'll see if you look at the final vote on that, we have 134 members in the House, and I don't know the number offhand, but 7 Republicans voted against it. The rest were just caught up in, I don't even know what's happening right now. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. There's nothing in front of me.
I mean, RaeAnna has said this to me before. The fact of the matter is that they traded all of their integrity for their chance at power.
Yeah. That's a great way to say it. By the way, when you say particularly that one senator is a Democratic Socialist, I mean, you're not kidding, right?
That is how he describes himself. That is how he lists himself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And to people in the rest of America, like the Democrat Party that exists in the rest of America does not exist in Minnesota. It's called, what is it called again?
The Democratic Farmer Labor Party.
DFL.
Right. So it's technically different than the Democrat Party.
Yes.
They have a different name, but they would describe themselves as Democrats.
As Democrats.
Yeah.
Right.
But he goes beyond that. They are not progressive and far left enough for him. So he has to describe himself as a Democratic Socialist.
Yeah. And he just wanted to break the system, knowing that there's a one vote majority. He just said, I'm not showing up, and then they can't pass anything.
Well, and that kind of plays into the 2023 drama. So his bill was it was an Uber-Lyft bill, a lot of drama behind it. Basically, Uber and Lyft threatened to leave the state because of the unworkable regulations and mandates that were going to be put on them. So actually, they did jam it through in 2023 under the same threat. I'm going to walk if you guys don't pass my bill. So the legislature bowed and passed it in 2023. And that was actually the first and only veto of Governor Walz. And then he created a working group, and the working group really was supposed to work through the summer. That same senator who cared so much about this bill actually resigned his place on the working group. Nobody knows why. And just basically tried to punt it to the next legislature. And so he was absolutely determined. He was going to get this bill through one way or another, even if it meant sinking his, everything else.
Yeah. Well, and this senator who left, it sounds like he would have probably it would have been better for the citizens of Minnesota if he'd have just stayed gone, and then they couldn't have done anything, right?
I would have preferred that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably would have helped the taxpayers of Minnesota quite a bit.
It would make all our lives a little cheaper.
I'm sure that's right. So all the omnibus, all these other things like the bonding and everything else that they were supposed to do, that couldn't be rolled up into an omnibus bill. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The bonding requires working with Republicans because you have to pass with a 3/5 majority.
Sure.
This legislature has had no interest in reaching across the aisle. You can tell that in every way from how they stack their committees. They have a 1-seat majority, and when Republicans had that 2 years ago, that means that they just had a 1-seat majority on the committees. These committees now are stacked 5-2, 6-2, so that no matter what they want, even if some of their members disagree, they can pass anything through. And
so they're not even, usually committees are done sort of proportional to the majority.
Correct.
So if you have a thin majority, you have maybe a 5-4 committee or something like that. You're saying that's not that way. It's 7-2 or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's total abuse of power. I mean, there's just no other way of saying it. Hopefully Republicans didn't do that when they were in control. I would hope not.
They did not. The committees were set with, it was 5-4. It was 7-8. It was a 1 vote majority. It completely reflected how close the institution was. I mean, the DFL won their final Senate seat by just over 300 votes. It's a really close race. I mean, even though Minnesota is looked at as a blue state, if you look within the legislature, it is really 51-49, and it goes back and forth.
How come the senator, why didn't they read this omnibus bill before the vote was called? Just they were running out of time and the majority called the vote, or how did that work?
Yeah, so this was I think there were about 12 bills left altogether, and it started to get to be about 11:30 or so. And the DFL realized that time was not going to be on their side. So what they did was they just threw almost everything together, with a few exceptions, and just combined it and rolled it out. And that's when things really started to disintegrate. And Minnesota is one of the few states too that does not have a time limit for debate. So what they did was they cut off debate in the middle of some members' remarks, and they did a parliamentary procedure called the previous question, which basically puts everything to a halt. And that's when you vote on the bill. And so that's what they ended up doing. It's kind of Minnesota's version of the nuclear option. And then, again, like Jake said earlier, we're just going to have to pass it to find out what's in it.
Is there concern on the part of the citizens of Minnesota? I mean, did this just kind of go unnoticed, or are citizens and the media and stuff calling this out?
I think that's one of the big problems is, this is happening at 11:30 at night, and everybody has their own families to worry about. They've got their own lives to live, and our government has been operating in the dead of night. And again, that's unacceptable considering that there is a trifecta. They could have managed their time much better. They could have leadership could have done a much better job. And like I said, there's no reason that any of this should have happened. We should not be legislating in the dead of night. And it's just such a disgrace and disservice to the citizens. And when we're hitting the doors, people are like, no, I did not know that. But that does not sound like good governance to me.
Yeah. And I'd add to that, one thing, Jeff, is that we're making sure that the legislators are held accountable for their actions. I mean, that's a big part of our mission right now is, I know they did a lot of stuff they wish people would forget, but we're going to make sure that they don't. To your point about after the bill was passed, when it came time to sign the bill, there was no celebration. There was no ceremony. The governor did not want to take any tough questions. He didn't want an opportunity for negative press, so they just signed the bill and then later went out touting their quote unquote accomplishments. Mm-hmm. But they really did nothing to shed any light on what they did.
Yeah.
This is just, it's very frustrating. It's one of the things, I live in Colorado, as you know, and We have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which of course they can't go in and just in the dead of night pass a bunch of tax increases and spending, things like that. So I've always appreciated that they can't, but a lot of people don't realize that in many legislatures across the country, that can happen in just a moment's notice. One night in 10 minutes, they can have, billions of dollars of tax increases passed on the citizens of a state. I mean, have you looked at how much this bill in and of itself in those few minutes costs the citizens of Minnesota?
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's just amazing. Yeah. It's just crazy. So what happens now with all of this? Is it, you talked about maybe there's some lawsuits, single subject rule. I would think somebody would sue over that. Would they not?
We're hopeful. I know we've had people taking a look at it. In general, they've tried to change it procedurally where they list in the subject of the bill all the things that are included. And they say, well, it's all there in the single subject. And so far that's held up, unfortunately, in court. That sounds a little silly to me, to be honest, and I'm sure to many of our viewers.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing we can do is make sure that the constituents of these people are aware of what occurred, are aware of the bad policy, of the tax increases, of the 40% growth in government in 2 years, and make sure that their voices are heard.
Yeah. Gosh, 40% in 2 years.
40% growth. It's unbelievable.
Oh. Yeah. Like when is enough enough? When is it unsustainable?
And the really insidious thing about what they did in 2023 with their $10 billion in hikes is that they parsed it out through every other bill except the tax bill. So, in the transportation, I believe Colorado, you have a delivery fee, and now we have that as well. It's just like all the taxes were tucked in, and people, it's hard to follow, right? As an average citizen, especially when bills are hundreds of pages long. And so people are starting to realize as they get to the checkout counter and they're like, wow, that is a lot more expensive than I realized. And we had so much tucked in everywhere, and it's finally starting to trickle in. Especially over these last few months, those taxes are kicking in, and it hurts. It's hurting, especially with high inflation, the whole Bidenomics thing. And, now we have one expensive Minnesota. It's people's wallets are hurting.
Yeah. Yeah. And people have, they do this all the time with the delivery fee or something like that. And of course, people tend to sometimes blame the deliverer or the company that they order it. They blame Amazon, and it's not Amazon.
Right.
It's their government that's doing this. It's a tax. So, yeah. Well, listen, I want to thank you both for bringing this to us, and thank you for all your efforts to hold these legislators accountable for this mess that they've created, and make sure you keep exposing it.
No, we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you both. Well, listen, this is another example of how desperate sometimes people are when they're in power to take your money. And this is a great example of that. And, legislators should be held accountable by the citizens for these kinds of things. And again, we've got a single subject rule in the state of Minnesota, and it seems like it's just being abused. And, we say, well, if we just put everything into our description, that's somehow in concert with the law. That's just, that doesn't even pass the smell test. These folks should be held accountable for the bad things that they're doing in the bad way that they are acting. And I don't know, the whole cat burglar story, man, that's a new one. I don't know. That's interesting. Well, listen. All right. Hey, thanks for joining us on American Potential. Go out there, fight for liberty, fight for freedom, do everything you can so you can prevent these kinds of things happening in your state. If you'd like to get connected with Americans for Prosperity or a state chapter, make sure you email me at jeff@americanpotential.com. Thank you for listening, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.